Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Louie, and on behalf of Campbell Company, I would like to welcome you to State of the Environmental Sector. Thanks for joining us today. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly go through some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. First, please close any programs other than GoToWebinar that are running on your computer. We recommend calling in with a telephone instead of using your computer speakers, and if you do experience any visual issues, please send a chat to Campbell Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. Today's webinar will last 60 minutes, and you'll earn one continuing education credit that is good with your participation with CFRE International. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes information on how to download your certificate. In that same follow-up email, you'll also receive a link to download today's slides, along with a link to the recording. We do welcome questions throughout the webinar, so please use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right side of your computer screen. We will also hold time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to fundraising consultant Lauren Collette and executive search senior consultant Colleen Rogers.
Great, thank you, Emily. We are thrilled to be here today. So yes, my name is Lauren Collette. I've been at the firm for 3 years now, and I'm in our Seattle office. Prior to joining Campbell, I was a frontline fundraiser out in Washington, D.C., and I focused on various aspects of individual fundraising, so ranging anywhere from board management and special events at the Kennedy Center to really overseeing annual giving at the Smithsonian American History Museum. And one thing I just want to highlight is that although my background focus is arts and culture, my area of interest based on personal passion really lies with the environmental and conservation sector. And I've been working with many organizations in this sector since joining Campbell. So it's really great to be here today.
And I'm Colleen Rogers. I'm a senior consultant on the executive search team, as Emily mentioned. I have been with Campbell Company in the Chicago office for nearly 11 years. Prior to joining the firm, I worked with a statewide historic preservation organization based here in Chicago. So I've sort of been at that intersection of arts and culture as well as conservation. As part of the executive search team, I've really worked alongside our director to build out our work with environmental organizations, partnering with clients that have included Environmental Defense Fund, American Prairie Reserve, the Trust for Public Land, and the National Park Foundation. So it's great to be here with Lauren today presenting our State of the Environmental Sector report. And with that, I'll let Lauren kick us off.
Great, thanks, Colleen. So where I'd like to start us today is just a little bit of context and overview, especially sector-wide, which was really the basis for Campbell Company doing this study. So as you see with the chart in the top left corner, the sector really saw significant growth in the past few years. So from 2016 to 2018, giving to environmental and animal welfare organizations increased at a higher rate than total charitable giving in the U.S. So 13.5% for giving to environment and animal organizations and around 8% total charitable giving. So this level of growth is actually tracking to many of the findings in our study, which we're going to get into soon. And that really includes the point below that, which is called the Trump bump. So following the 2016 presidential election, many organizations experienced this term, the Trump bump. That's what it's been coined. And that means that there was a significant surge in giving. And what I mean by that is really both an increase in revenue and an influx of new donors based on what donors and the public saw as a perceived threat to organizations' work in the environmental conservation sector. And there was really this renewed sense of urgency and need around these organizations' missions. And so then lastly, on the right-hand side, you see some challenges. And this is what our firm had anecdotally been hearing from clients over the past few years. So at a high level, these challenges included just being able to stand out and remain relevant in what's a really crowded yet dynamic landscape. A challenge around building relationships with the next generation of donors, and we will touch on that here in a few minutes, as well as communicating the outcomes of their work. So really being able to clearly show the impact and the result of philanthropy and what that is doing to move not only organizations, but the whole sector forward. So we also want to just start us off by talking a little bit about what we did with this study. So really we had to define the project first. And so for our team, that meant just trying to figure out what we were hoping to learn, what kind of questions we wanted to ask, what we were hoping to find out as a part of this study. And then we had to define our sector parameters. So our sector, we want to make sure to note for you all here, was really broad by design. So we included large chapter-based organizations and even smaller regional organizations such as land trusts, zoos or aquaria, or park foundations, and even some organizations focused on environmental policy. What we did not include was any animal welfare organizations. So as a firm, we found that the opportunities and challenges those animal welfare organizations face are usually distinct a bit from what environmental and conservation organizations are experiencing. And so what we did was we defined the sector parameters and we moved on to an electronic survey. We launched the survey to 300 organizations and we collected information from 24 of those, which is an 8% response rate, as you can see on the screen. From those 24 organizations, we had 18 indicate that they were willing to have a follow-up interview with us. So we set up interviews with those 18 organizations and development leaders. And then last but not least, we developed a report, which I hope you've all received and which is the basis of this presentation today, really highlighting the trends and themes from those interviews. One thing I would say is that this presentation, our report, really leans more heavily on interviews, anecdotally, and what we heard in terms of themes around there. Through the survey, we're just trying to gather more high-level information about who the organizations were and some kind of high-level trends we found. So a little bit about the organizational profile from those who completed the survey. Again, as I mentioned, the scope and the sector parameters were purposely large, and you can see that from this profile on here, these key metrics. So organizations' budgets ranged anywhere from $150,000 to $200 million. The development budgets were ranging anywhere from $10,000 to $40 million. And the contributed revenue was also ranging anywhere from around $200,000 to $215 million. We did include the median and the mean just so you all could get a sense of that. For anyone joining, I just like to make sure we define these terms. So median is that middle value, so the number that actually falls in the middle. And sometimes that is considered really to be the best representative of what's the true middle of what we found. And then the mean is the average. So again, this is just to show you there's a wide range of different organizations who participated. And what I actually find fascinating about this is that whether I was talking to a small regional land trust or a huge international conservation powerhouse of an organization, a lot of the same ideas and challenges were bubbling up, and we were hearing that. Of course, I think it's obvious to say how each of those organizations is going to handle their challenges and opportunities is very different and unique to each of them. But I think that it's really great to find for us as Campbell to be able to share these really robust and inclusive findings that represent many types of organizations. So I hope each of you listening on the phone today feel that you yourself are represented in here somehow. So Colleen, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. So first, we're going to share some of the broad data that came from our survey before really digging into some of the more specific findings that we got into. So from the survey results, what we saw was that 2/3 of the organizations surveyed that responded to the survey have an endowment in place. Those range in value from about $300,000 to $192 million. So again, speaking to that wide range of organization sizes that Lauren touched on. From a staffing perspective, nearly half of the organizations had gone through a leadership transition at the CEO or executive director level within the last 3 years. And more than half, 54.2%, had experienced an increase in the number of development staff positions that they had as an organization. Another point Lauren touched on earlier was the increase in first-time donors. a total of 86.4% of the organizations surveyed saw their number of first-time donors or members increase in the last 3 years. 36% of those saw a significant increase of 10% or more, and 50% saw a more moderate increase of about 5 to 10%. A good percentage of those, about 38%, attributed the 2016 presidential election as having a direct impact on that increase in donors. About a third were not sure whether it was an impact or other factors at play. Looking ahead in terms of campaigns, 25% of the organizations who responded to the survey were currently in a campaign, but 62% of them were either planning to launch a campaign in the next 1 to 3 years or were considering launching a campaign to leverage the increased focus around the environmental sector. So following the survey, we conducted direct interviews with a number of organizations to really dig deeper into some of the responses that we've gotten. And as we did that, 7 key themes really emerged that we're going to discuss for the bulk of this webinar. The first of those was the desire and need to act quickly in response to a fast-moving political environment. As we mentioned, a number of organizations experienced the Trump bump that Lauren mentioned. Among those, Environmental Defense Fund and Earth Justice really saw a significant increase in first-time donors. And as a result, they really worked to adjust their strategy and add development staff to take advantage of those new opportunities and the increased funding that was coming from those new donors as well. Other organizations just did not have a significant enough increase. They felt the need to make those adjustments, but definitely moved forward as well. In our conversations, though, many of the leaders that we spoke with reflected on the shock, frankly, that their staff felt in the days and weeks following the 2016 presidential election. We heard that they really wish they'd been prepared better for either outcome before the election and had secured leadership buy-in and prepared proactive messaging to really rally both existing donors, but also reaching out to and engaging first-time donors. Essentially, in hindsight, they wish that they had been able to mount a faster response as a result of the election. That said, we also heard about new opportunities, frankly. Heightened attention around the environmental sector really enabled a lot of organizations to raise more money in general. But a number of them also mentioned that they needed to be cautious in how they approached these opportunities and what the messaging was surrounding them, given that they had typically had a more bipartisan donor base or some more conservative donors who didn't identify as part of the resistance movement that really began to emerge following the election. Lauren?
Great, thanks, Colleen. So going into finding number 2, we had a lot of leaders share a desire to tailor messaging to engage an aging donor base, but at the same time wanting to engage younger generations and really different populations and advancing DEIA efforts. And just to define that, that means diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And then there's also a theme around meeting donors where they are, which is increasingly online today. So just to touch on the planned giving part, a great deal of environmental organizations Campbell work with, they tend to see a majority of their donor base in that baby boomer range. So let's say like 50 to 75 years old. And one organization, Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, found that their average member's age was 61. And it's no surprise then that these organizations are thinking about legacy societies as a result. So they recently established such as one, Habitat Legacy Society. They started a quarterly newsletter. They significantly increased marketing of all planned giving in their communications and marketing outreach. And the result is that it's really improved not only their culture of philanthropy, because you're going from kind of a membership-based transaction to true philanthropy, but they've seen really significant increases in the number of land gift estate gifts. And they really weren't doing any kind of this targeted outreach towards this demographic before. And so even with these small changes, just as putting some, starting a legacy society, putting that information in their outreach and communications, they've started to see some really great results, which is fantastic. It's the right generation. It's the right time to be thinking about planned giving. Moving on to really reaching out towards different demographic shifts, other organizations are also striving to build a donor base that's really reflecting the communities that they're serving. And they're also trying to develop a pipeline of giving. And so one thing I just want to note is that a lot of organizations are really just starting to address this challenge, and they're not really having formed plans yet. But there were a few examples we heard about that we wanted to share. So the Oregon Environmental Council created an emerging leaders board just to bring younger perspectives into their organization. Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust is starting to segment their messaging with their urban base versus their rural base. So they're really trying to segment and think about messaging that's targeting and speaking to what someone in a rural setting may care about and think about versus what motivates someone in an urban setting to give and to help their organization. And then the Spokane Parks Foundation has begun to focus more heavily on that equity and accessibility lens, which truthfully is just a really natural fit for an organization that's supporting public spaces. So they have a program called Make a Splash in a Kid's Life, and that's removing financial barriers so more children of any socioeconomic background can enjoy swimming and to take advantage of the parks and the land. And so that's one outcome for them. In terms of online engagement, that really speaks to being able to reach a more diverse audience. And so many organizations are increasing their efforts with online giving. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about some core elements of online fundraising. When you say online or digital fundraising, it's a huge sphere of strategies you can be working on, but we think that these four are really some immediate strategies that directly support the success of your program. And if you don't have in place, we really do recommend you think about it sooner rather than later. So the first is just having a mobile responsive website and mobile responsive emails. Being mobile friendly is just now being linked to being donor friendly. And a lack of mobile friendly websites or donation forms or emails are going to put you at a disadvantage. You really want to maximize and create a seamless supporter giving experience. And again, you want to meet your donors where they are. And I don't know about you, but I constantly have my iPhone in my hand. That's how I look up organizations when I hear about them. And so meeting your donors with mobile responsive tools is really important. You also want an accessible and user-friendly donation page. You don't want to make the experience of giving your organization money challenging. You don't want donors to get frustrated and just exit altogether. So one helpful rule of thumb, we always say, link a donate button on every single page of your organization's website, whether it's in a menu or a sidebar, wherever you want it to be. But you want someone to be able, if they're combing through your education or your conservation, to see that donate button, and maybe it will result in a gift to your organization. Next is annual giving incorporation. So nothing exists in a vacuum, and that includes fundraising. So to think through an annual fundraising plan without thinking through an online or social media coordination is truthfully just a missed opportunity. Your donors are actually selecting in how they want to engage with you. It may be traditional by mail or by phone, but more and more donors are going onto your website, your Facebook page, your Instagram page, and that's how they're actually interacting with you. So what used to be viewed as additive strategy is really now core strategy. So thinking through online giving and again, social media and that type of messaging with your annual fundraising plan is pretty critical. And last but not least, immediately after giving and completing a transaction to your organization, the donor should be redirected to a thank you landing page. And on that thank you landing page, you really want to have some sort of impact messaging and just offer a glimpse into what their donation is helping your organization to do. Because of you, we're able to keep our doors open 365 days a year. Even some small messaging around that lets them know that their gift and that clicking of the button is making an immediate impact and doing good work. And we also, of course, recommend some sort of thank you email as a result. So moving on to trend number 3 is an emphasis on tailored engagement strategies. So we heard about people customizing their engagement opportunities for a donor base that's really looking to get closer to the work and to understand the direct impact that organizations are making. And by and large, I actually think these strategies are great because what you're doing is building long-term relationships with these individuals versus just quote unquote raising money. So the first is due to a donor's desire for deeper involvement, and that's really creating that authentic connection between their interest and your organization's mission. Many organizations we spoke to are providing donors with a value add through these educational or recreational social opportunities. So for example, the Lands Council is bringing major donors into the field. Those who have interest in their ecology lab, they're inviting them into a tailored tour. They're really connecting the donor with their area of interest. And there's never an ask involved, but a lot of times it can lead to a gift being made. Let's see here. Several leaders also discussed opportunities to engage millennials and that younger generation I spoke to earlier. One organization is hosting beer and taco gatherings. That's actually now supported by corporate sponsors who are on their side viewing it as an acquisition opportunity. So it's really mutually beneficial for this one organization. And then point number 2 on the screen is that donors are really wanting to see the tangible results of the work that they're really deeply invested in and giving to. There's that focus of measurable outcomes that they also want to see and experience. So for example, Earth Justice, who's really their tagline is, we are lawyers for the environment. They're going to court to fight injustices, are showing this and backing up their work by showing donors their victory rate of over 90% for cases that their attorneys have led. That's a really strong metric of outcome and impact that they can share with donors. We also heard, though, on the flip side, that there's some really great donor excitement around new and innovative approaches. So the Wetlands Initiative has observed actually elevated interest in concepts for their organization that are high risk and high reward. And donors are finding that they have a little more willingness to accept some of this uncertainty, that they know the work will be doing good, but they don't yet know how tangible the outcome is, or they can't say yet what the result will be and the impact. And so it's helpful to understand when you're segmenting your donor messaging and strategy, who your donors are, who perhaps different segments of your donors are, and perhaps who needs that sort of emphasis of outcome and measure and impact versus who maybe are the type of donors who are willing to take that risk on with you in the hopes that there will be some good that comes out of it. And then moving on to trend number 4, I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to anyone when we're doing a study on environmental and conservation organizations, but climate change really came up in a ton of interviews. And that was really both as a rallying point and as an obstacle. So again, unsurprisingly, the topic has an immediate sense of urgency. And so more and more organizations are directly tying their work to that urgent need and doing so in a more direct manner, especially through their messaging efforts. So American Forest was one organization, for an example, that since introducing language about the organization's impact on climate change, they've been putting it into all direct marketing materials. They've actually seen a significant growth as a result of this. So they've seen an increase in their giving by tying their messaging directly to the impact on climate change. Speaking of the second point, we also heard about the challenges that arise when trying to demonstrate progress on this global, large-scale problems if organizations are operating at more of a local or regional level. I mean, just saying the word climate change internationally, it's a big topic to tackle and to cover, and it's a big challenge. So by working in coalitions, they're able to more so demonstrate impact and relevance on a local and regional scale versus we're solving all of climate change. And that kind of leads us into point number 3, which is that local and regional organizations are really leaning into their on-the-ground impact. The Alliance for Great Lakes is focusing on local initiatives in multiple cities they're working in, and that's enabling them to really share tangible stories about how they're addressing the day-to-day lives of those communities. I think that this is a sense of doing your part locally and regionally is actually moving the whole needle forward in a much bigger way. And so it's kind of taking these bite-sized chunks of what is a major crisis and showing your role and how you are helping with your organization's mission. And then last but not least, environmental issues are long, they're big, and there's a lot of competing donor priorities right now that can even seem maybe more short-term urgent. That can range anywhere from reproductive to refugee rights. And those that we interviewed found that this sector particularly really needed to demonstrate the importance of the long game to its donors and how making now asks is actually tying to that long game. In essence, it's sort of a patience, it's a lesson in patience, but just being able to focus on that long game and to talk about it, that we're making an impact for the next generations, that messaging is working really well. It may not be this issue can be solved tomorrow type of issue. So we're going to take a quick Q&A break, and I know that Emily's been monitoring the line to see if any questions have been coming in.
Thanks, Lauren. We are getting some questions about more resources for more information on online giving. Do you have some more information about this?
Oh, yeah. Our firm loves to talk about online fundraising. So first, and I will do just a humble plug of Campbell resources, we have a bunch of blogs and past webinars focused on all kinds of things with online giving. So how do you structure annual giving? How do you build personas or think through like this A/B testing, which is the concept of segmenting your messaging? So I definitely recommend checking those out. But obviously Campbell's not the only firm or corporation that's working on this. And so I also recommend the blog Nonprofit Tech for Good. That's sort of my go-to. I think they have really great real life organization examples that they tie into their strategies. And then I love learning about this topic personally. I'm trying to think of okay, so there's 2 that I really, I leverage and actually watch their webinars. One is Classy, and I think that's a more popular one. And one is called Firespring. I want to say they're based out of somewhere in the Midwest, but I love their webinars. I bookmark them, I take notes from them, and I think they do a really great job of breaking down big topics of online fundraising. So again, just to repeat what I said, Nonprofit Tech for Good is a blog, and then Firespring and Classy for some sort of webinar education.
And then our second question is, regarding the report, did you find any differences regionally?
That's a really great question. I'm trying to think here. I think, of course, there are regional differences, but because we had such a large spread of organizations and, 24 to interview 18 is a good size, but I think it would have been too hard to really draw trends regionally. From the West, we had a sprinkling from the West Coast and from the Pacific Northwest and the Midwest and the South and the East Coast. And so when you think about it, that's only a few organizations for each. So I would say that we didn't so much focus on regional if, let's say, compared to if we had a sample size of 100 or more. I think that would have been easier to draw trends out of it. So I guess my long way of answering your question is, are there regional differences? I'm absolutely sure of it. Is that something we could really speak to from our findings? I can't really say, and I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So Colleen, I'm going to hand it back off to you.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So our 5th trend that really emerged from the conversations was really around increased interest in storytelling, mid-level giving, and a more nuanced approach to restricted giving. The first point in that, I think, really ties back to our third theme of tailoring messaging. But from a more broad standpoint, recent trends are really showing fewer people are interested in the concept of membership. There are fewer lower level donors overall due to the wealth gap we're seeing in society. And the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University has really been documenting this decline in broad-based philanthropy through its philanthropy panel study. And what they have really seen and what their data has shown is that between 2000 and 2014, the share of Americans giving to charity has decreased from 66.2% to 55.5%. The result of this is a lot of organizations placing more emphasis in building a strong pipeline of major donors. And this is across sectors. This is not specific just to the environmental sector. But working to build that major gift pipeline and attract more transformational gifts to their organization. So going back to storytelling, which I think really ties in to the tailored engagement strategies. This is really an effective way to engage donors at all levels. And a great example, Lauren, if you can go to the next slide. A great example that we've seen with one of the clients that Campbell Company has worked with is the Wilderness Society. And they've really integrated storytelling well, both internally and externally. For a couple of examples, their board of directors, as you would imagine, includes some of their biggest donors for the organization. When they get together for their board meetings, they have a standing tradition to go on a long hike to finish the day, and then they wrap up with storytelling around a campfire that focuses on victories as well as stories of impact. And this has really helped them to both more deeply engage some of their most generous donors, but also really builds cohesion and dedication within their board. The slide that you're seeing on your screen right now is actually for an initiative that they started a year or two ago called the Our Wild initiative. And this really demonstrates how they've taken this same storytelling approach with a much more external face to it. We can send out a link to this page on their website, but if you scroll down from here, you'll see they have 12 videos available from a variety of people who are drawn to the work that the Wilderness Society has done. And the videos really tell very compelling, very personal stories as to why public lands are important and why they should continue to be protected. So if you get a chance, definitely check that out after the webinar. In terms of mid-level giving, this is really defined as larger capacity than annual fund, but smaller than a major gift, and really bridging those two areas of giving for an organization. And in recent years, across Campbell Company and across sectors, we've seen a real increased desire from organizations to build out a more robust mid-level giving program as a way to bolster a more sustainable major gifts pipeline. And obviously, this takes time to really build it out. It takes planning and significant investment, but the payoff has been well worth the effort. At Campbell Company, we really break mid-level giving strategy into 5 key areas. The first of these is context, really looking at the maturity and strength of a donor base for an organization. Typically, donors who show the interest and ability to give at a sustained level are willing to be prime candidates for a mid-level portfolio. From a leadership perspective, we talk about having a clearly defined plan and ensuring that there are appropriate resources in place for a mid-level giving program. And that needs to include having clear goals and KPIs for measuring results of this. Also, wanting to be sure that a focus is kept on staffing and systems, really define the mid-level giving roles and how a mid-level giving program will be supported through the effective use of a database, training staff on how to appropriately steward mid-level giving prospects, and as well as qualifying them for major gift potential down the road. we've seen an optimum portfolio for a mid-level giving officer typically range from about 600 to 800 donors for a really broad-based program that's including a mix of both phone, email, and direct outreach. For donor engagement, it would be one of the fourth key area of a mid-level program. It's really about providing planning and training for implementing specific engagement strategies. In general, a mid-level category should be focused on donor capacity, accessibility, and previous giving history, with a real emphasis on the giving history as a key indicator for who would fit into a mid-level portfolio well. And then finally, a case for support, focusing on tailored communication and engagement for donors at this level. Both Earth Justice and Environmental Defense Fund have really seen some success come from doing this by implementing higher levels of cultivation that have tailored communications and events that are specifically targeted at their mid-level donors. And then finally, while that importance of securing unrestricted funds is always going to be key for any organization, what we heard from our conversations in this survey was that there are some real benefits to pursuing restricted giving, especially as it relates to those transformational gifts that organizations are really starting to emphasize. For example, Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust really spoke to being able to provide major donors a closer connection to their gift and the impact of their gift, and also being able to leverage that during a current campaign.
Great, thanks, Colleen. I know everyone just saw that my computer needed to update itself on their screen, so we're just moving that over here. Give me 1 second. All right. So theme number 6 is that there was an uncertainty around the impact from recent tax law changes. What I want to say is that I am by no means an expert in tax law, but we did think that there were some interesting points and themes that came out of our question around it that we did want to share. So again, most organizations hadn't received questions from donors around tax law changes, which our firm actually found really surprising because I think the philanthropy sector as a whole was really bracing for a substantial response and outreach from donors. One leader from the National Audubon Society actually said something that really resonated with us, and they were saying that tax-based reasons for giving are usually pretty far down the ladder in terms of why donors really give. And they were absolutely right. So there's a lot of other reasons why organizations receive gifts from donors. And it's important to make sure, speaking to that first point on the screen, you want to make sure your organization has a compelling case for support that's really speaking to the why your donors want to give. So before touching on the other 2 points on the screen, I just want to share a reminder of why do people make major gifts. It's really anchored in their beliefs and their value system. They have a belief in the mission of the organization and a belief that the gift is going to make a difference in the work that you all are doing each and every day. Many people give out a routine. We hear frequently, well, I've always given to this organization. I care about it and I think they do good work and I want to continue helping them each year. So they're giving to the same organizations year after year. And many have that sense of wanting to give back to their community. So being a part of the larger whole for those that are around them, whether it's locally, regionally, or nationally. These are all reasons that someone may give a significant gift at any time. And so to tailor your communications to reflect these ideas, again, the mission, the impact of giving is going to be really critical to receiving major gifts for your organization. So going back to the prior screen, some organizations, and this included, just to name a couple specifically, the Lands Council or Port Townsend Marine Science Center, actually reported increases in contributions from IRAs. So we thought it was important to point out that there's always an opportunity to remind your donors about the opportunity to give from their IRAs. And of course, because I like to define things, make sure everyone knows what we're speaking to, that's essentially giving from one's retirement account. When donors contribute from IRAs directly to your organization, they don't have to pay taxes on the donation, which can be really appealing, especially for some folks who are retired and maybe don't have the income coming in to make donations that way. And then last but not least, to the third point, we heard about a rise in grants from donor-advised funds. And this happened from organizations of all sizes across the country when we were interviewing people. And we think that this trend may be partially being able to attribute it to tax law changes. But we thought it was important just to kind of revisit a few points about donor-advised funds, just to make sure if you are thinking about this or anyone on your team is, you have these points, kind of top of your mind. So donor advised funds are also typically called DAFs, as you'll see on the screen. They're really vehicles for giving. So they're managed by a public entity on behalf of families or individuals. And really what you can think of it as is like a charitable savings account. So in general, building relationships with supporters who have donor advised funds is no different than cultivating or stewarding any other kind of donor. Stewardship, gratitude is always key for donors giving through any kind of vehicle, as well as communicating the impact of their gifts. So what you see here on the screen are 5 points I'm going to quickly take us through. First is promote donor-advised funds on all your communication channels. So include language about that you can accept gifts through a donor-advised fund. Put this in your emails, your appeals, perhaps your newsletter. For some sort of personalized outreach, you can always say, we just want to remind you today that you can make grant recommendations through your donor-advised fund if you have one. But in order to fight climate change, you have to take the next step. If you have a DAF, your funds are not actively working to save the planet until you notify your charitable sponsor to distribute the funds from your account directly to us today. So that's a more robust example. A simpler one can even be, if you have a DAF, please consider making a grant recommendation now. Similarly to the online giving messaging, you want to make giving through DAF easy and a seamless process. You want to make it transparent. So the Nature Conservancy on their website actually offers really clear information about their own DAF, as well as giving through DAF sponsored by other organizations. And if you have more questions about giving through a donor advised fund, please let us know, and here's contact information. So again, making it really clear so your donors aren't frustrated with what to do and they know exactly who to reach out to get answers to their questions is really important. Next, don't be afraid to reach out to DAF holders more than once a year if you need an additional ask. You can use the tax structure of DAF to your advantage. And once a DAF holder makes a gift to their fund, they receive the immediate tax benefits. So they aren't really motivated to recommend grants based on any sort of seasonal giving or tax deduction time frame. I think those who give through DAF are already indicating that they're taking their philanthropy seriously. And so if your organization has a pressing need, reach out, even if they have maybe made a grant distribution that year. I don't want you to ever feel constricted, by the traditional time of giving, because DAFs don't really work that way. Next is just understanding the rules. This is really important. When I first started out in fundraising, this was something, someone sat me down and kind of walked me through, and I was really grateful for that. So donors who give through DAFs, according to the IRS, cannot receive any personal benefit for their gift. So that means they can't use these accounts to purchase a gala ticket or a silent auction item, for example. They'll want to purchase a ticket a different way. That's great, but they can't receive those direct benefits. And they also can't sign a pledge form since they're not technically the legal owner of their fund assets, since they're giving it over to a separate entity. So instead, these offers will have a letter of intent. So you can offer your donor to sign something called a letter of intent, an LOI. In this way, there is some sort of written paperwork for your organization, and it's some sort of symbolic exchange between you and the donor that they will fulfill what they're telling you they will. But again, it can't be that technical pledge form. And then last but not least, use the correct language. When writing acknowledgement letters for any gifts that come from a DAF, remember that they're already receiving tax benefits prior to this. So don't use the standard language explaining that the gift is tax deductible, because it's a different set of rules and technically that's not correct. And so before I hand it off to Colleen, what I do want to say is that in February 29, our Campbell Company, we hosted a webinar exploring the latest trends in DAFs. And so if you are interested in DAFs just in general, or you want to kind of be up to date in terms of trends our firm is seeing, I really recommend you watch that recording. I learned a ton from it, and I think that anyone in the philanthropy field who listened to it would also.
Thanks, Lauren. The final trend that really came from our conversations in this survey was a recognition that succession planning matters, but there's a lack of dedicated resources to put towards this work. So part of what we think is really important is to just embed succession planning into your organization's culture. This is not a dirty word. We talk about succession planning, that's the term that's popularly used out there, but from my point of view, it really often aligns with retention planning. When I'm recruiting for organizations, if it's not for that top CEO position or a head of department, one of the most common questions that I hear is, what is the growth path for this role? Where can I move from here? From a day-to-day standpoint, succession planning is really about building skill sets and providing opportunity for staff to grow. A lot depends on clear communication. If there's somebody on your staff that you identify as having real potential to take on a leadership role over time, talk with them about it. Let them know that you see that potential, and then work to help them fill any skill gaps that might exist. Offer professional development opportunities, whether that's internal within your organization by shadowing a more senior staff member or taking on additional responsibilities that may be outside of their typically defined role. That can be a great way to build additional expertise. But it can also be external in terms of attending webinars, going to conferences, pursuing continuing education courses. There's so many opportunities out there to really help people to build their skill sets and be able to grow in their careers. But it really is about cultivating a level of trust and openness. This can also be a really great tool for building a more diverse leadership team. A lot of the organizations that Campbell Company works with have really talked with us about the fact that they feel that they demonstrate diversity pretty well at more junior levels on their staff, but feel that they're really still struggling to demonstrate that at this more senior leadership level of the organization, whether that's the C-suite or their board as well. So identifying that potential and really cultivating those professional development opportunities can help strengthen the DEIA aspects for an organization in the future. It's a long game, but it is one approach to help strengthen that aspect of an organization. And the final point on this slide, leadership transition can really be a catalyst for positive change. No organization wants to stagnate and stay the same and do the same things forever. So natural leadership transitions can really be a great inflection point to focus on new initiatives. What else would we like to do? How would we like to grow in this next phase of our history as an organization? And inherently bringing in new staff members is a great way to jumpstart some of those aspects and initiatives for an organization. The board also has a really key role to play in succession planning, especially if we're talking about it at that executive CEO or executive director level for an organization. As we referenced earlier, nearly half of the organizations that we surveyed had a leadership change in the last 3 years. Recruiting a new CEO is probably the most stressful job that a board member will ever have in the time that they're serving. But it's even more stressful when you're not prepared for it. So what we really recommend is at least having an emergency succession plan in place. It can help smooth the transition, whether it's a planned leadership change or something unexpected coming up that proverbial getting hit by a bus scenario. Communicate with a current leader about what their future plans might be and who they might identify on staff that has the potential to take on leadership positions or responsibilities within the organization. One of the things that we did a blog series earlier in the year around succession planning and talked with a number of organizations that had been through a successful transition process. And one of the things that was a little surprising to me, but really interesting, was that it was viewed as a really positive aspect of transition if it's possible to have some overlap between the outgoing leader and the incoming staff person. It can be helpful from a number of perspectives, whether that's just historical knowledge transfer, managing the transition and handoff of key relationships, especially with high-level donors, but also that opportunity to serve as an advisor to the person coming in, particularly following a departure of a long-term leader. This can be very useful. But the key to all of this is really to set clear boundaries if that is what you're able to have happen. Draw the line that this is the role you are now going to play as the person who's departing. These are the things that are my responsibility now as the new person filling this role. One of the things, though, that we heard from a number of the conversations we had was that there's a very real concern that, particularly with smaller organizations, about not having the resources to dedicate to a comprehensive succession planning program. I still go back to the fact I think it's best practice to have an emergency plan in place, especially for key leaders, not just the CEO, but some of those other key roles, such as the head of finance, the chief development officer, and potentially a head of programs as well. Make sure that there's backup and duplication in terms of who has access to bank accounts, financial information, check signing authority, where is there overlap with key donors for an organization to be able to continue those relationships and cultivations if there is an absence or a departure of a key staff member. And frankly, who can step in to manage critical responsibilities in the case of an unexpected absence? Is there somebody who can step in to cover certain pieces of internal operations if a CEO has an unexpected departure? Or is there a board member who may be able to step in and serve as an interim? But really, one of the key things is to have unity around succession planning. Really, the open communication is key throughout this. And just making sure that people are on the same page and can be prepared, at least in some way, shape, or form. And really, I think it's important to remember that succession planning isn't about wanting anybody to leave your organization. It's really just about planning and preparing for the future in the way you would for so many other aspects within the organization.
Great. So I know that we have one more break for Q&A. Emily, are we getting any questions in?
Doesn't look like it, so I think I'll just hand it back to you to close out the presentation.
Okay, well, great. So I know I'm the type of person, I don't necessarily have questions right away, but as I sit on data and information, I think about them later. So if you do, you can always, please, we have our emails up on the screen. Please don't hesitate to email myself or Colleen to follow up. And last but not least, there will be a link to the full report in the follow-up email. You see the link there below. I know you can't click in it, but we will share that link with you so you can download it and read it closely. And it does provide other examples and anecdotes, as well as some more data from the survey that I think you'll all find interesting. And Colleen and I know all of Campbell is just thrilled you joined us today. And so thank you so much again, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.